You're driving home, late, maybe 11 p.m. The roads are empty. You check your mirrors out of habit, but there's nothing there. Then, in the distance, you see it. Flashing lights, red and blue. Your stomach drops for no reason. You weren't speeding. You didn't run that yellow light 3 blocks back, but your hands still tighten on the wheel. Your heart still speeds up. That's the first weird thing, isn't it? You haven't done anything wrong, but the second those lights come on, you feel like you have. What would you actually do in that moment? Be honest. Would you pull over immediately? Would you start thinking about every single thing in your car? Every smell? Every sound? Every possible reason they might be pulling you over? Most people say they'd stay calm, but the data says something completely different. Pause for a second. Hit the comment section. Tell me, have you ever been pulled over and felt that instant guilt even though you knew you were fine? I'll wait. Here's what's interesting. Most people think police ask questions for one simple reason: to get information, to figure out what happened. That seems obvious, right? They ask where you're going, where you're coming from, if you know why they pulled you over. And most of us assume these are just standard questions, harmless questions, routine. But that's not what's actually happening. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you might change how you see every single interaction you ever have with law enforcement. And more than that, it might change how you see conversations you're having every single day without even realizing it. My name is Hostname, and I've spent years studying the psychology behind high-stakes conversations. Not just police interrogations, not just traffic stops, but the hidden structure beneath any situation where one person holds power and the other person is trying not to mess up. And what I found is this: the questions police ask aren't really about finding the truth. Not in the way you think. They're about something much deeper. Something most people never notice until it's too late. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why cops ask what they ask, what your answers actually communicate, and most importantly, how to protect yourself without being rude, without being suspicious, and without accidentally saying something that gets you into real trouble. This isn't about hating the police. This isn't about paranoia. This is about understanding the game so you can play it smart. Let me take you back to 2003, Nebraska. A guy named John Bruce is driving home from a friend's house. He gets pulled over for a broken taillight. The officer walks up, does the standard introduction, and then asks that famous question: "Do you know why I pulled you over?" John says no. He genuinely doesn't know. The officer tells him about the taillight. John says, "Oh, I didn't realize. I'll get it fixed." Then the officer asks, "Mind if I take a quick look inside your car?" John, wanting to be cooperative, says sure. 30 minutes later, John is handcuffed. Not for the taillight. For a small amount of marijuana the officer found under the passenger seat. John didn't even know it was there. A friend had left it weeks earlier. Here's the thing. That officer wasn't lying when he said taillight. The taillight was broken. That was real. But the question John answered, that wasn't about the taillight. That was about consent. That was about access. And John, like most people, gave it away for free. This is where most people get it wrong. They think police ask questions to gather facts. And yes, sometimes that's true. But more often, the questions are doing something else entirely. They're testing compliance. They're building a psychological framework where you feel like you have no choice but to keep answering. And once you say yes once, it gets harder to say no the second time. Let me give you an example. The very first question an officer often asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Think about that question for a second. On the surface, it seems straightforward, but here's the trap. If you say yes, you're admitting guilt to something. Maybe you were going 3 miles over, maybe you didn't fully stop at that stop sign, but now, in your own words, you've acknowledged a violation. That's powerful, that's evidence. And if you say no, well, that's fine too, because now the officer gets to tell you. And the moment they tell you, you're back in the same position. Either way, you're engaged. Either way, you're talking. But here's the part nobody talks about. The real power move isn't answering the question. It's understanding why the question exists in the first place. This comes from something called the Reed technique. It's an interrogation method developed in the 1940s and still used by police departments across North America. The Reed technique is brilliant, actually, and terrifying. Because it's not designed to find the truth. It's designed to get a confession, whether you're guilty or not. And the first step of the Reed technique is behavioral analysis, which is a fancy way of saying they ask you simple, low-stakes questions just to see how you react. That's what's happening on the side of the road at 11 p.m. The officer isn't just asking where you're going, they're watching your eyes, your hands, your breathing. They're listening to whether you hesitate, whether you over-explain, whether you get defensive or too friendly. And here's the kicker. None of that is admissible in court as proof of guilt, but it's absolutely used to decide whether to dig deeper. So what do? Most people think there are 2 options. Option 1, be totally cooperative, answer every question, and hope your innocence protects you. Option 2, be hostile, refuse to answer, and look suspicious as hell. Both of those are wrong. The real answer is a third option, one that very few people know, one that protects your rights without making you look guilty. Let me walk you through it. The single most important sentence you can memorize is this: Officer, I respect what you do, but I don't answer questions. Say it calmly. Say it politely. Say it without anger. And then stop talking. That's it. That's the whole secret. But here's why it works. Because it's not a refusal to comply. You're not resisting. You're not being rude. You're simply exercising a right. And interestingly, officers know this. They've been trained on it, but most people never use it. So when you do, it disrupts the pattern. Remember what I said about pattern interrupts earlier? This is the same idea. The officer has a script. Hello. License and registration. Do you know why I pulled you over? Where are you headed tonight? Have you had anything to drink? Mind if I take a look around? Each question builds on the last. Each answer gives them more information and more psychological leverage. But if you break the script early, calmly, respectfully, the whole dynamic changes. Now I can already hear some of you thinking, but if I say I don't answer questions, won't they assume I'm hiding something? That's a fair concern. And here's where the psychology gets really interesting. Research shows that when people refuse to answer questions politely and consistently, most officers interpret that as confidence, not guilt. Why? Because guilty people tend to over-explain. They talk too much. They volunteer information. They try to convince you they're innocent. Innocent people, on the other hand, often assume the truth will speak for itself. So when you calmly say, I don't answer questions, you're actually signaling something unexpected. You're signaling that you know your rights and you're not afraid to use them. That's not suspicious. That's uncommon. Let me give you a real-world example that changed my entire perspective on this. In 2013, a law professor named James Duane gave a lecture that went viral. He told his students, future lawyers, that he would never, under any circumstances, answer a police officer's questions. Not if he was innocent, not if he had nothing to hide, not ever. And he backed it up with case after case. People who were completely innocent, no criminal record, no motive, no evidence, and they still ended up convicted because something they said during a routine traffic stop was misinterpreted, misremembered, or manipulated. One case he talked about involved a man who was asked, "Have you been drinking tonight?" He said no, he hadn't, but he had a slight stutter. The officer interpreted the hesitation as deception. The man was arrested, the charges were later dropped, but he spent the night in jail, he lost his car, he lost a day of work, all because he answered one question. You see, the problem isn't that police are evil, the problem is that police are human. They see hundreds of people a week. They develop patterns. They look for anything unusual, and if you're nervous, which almost everyone is during a traffic stop, that gets interpreted as suspicious, even though nervousness is completely normal. Even though you might have social anxiety, even though you might just be cold, your physiology works against you. So what can you actually do? Let me break this down into real, actionable steps. Step 1. When the lights come on, pull over safely. Turn on your interior light if it's dark. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. Do not reach for anything. Do not dig through the glove box. Do not get out of the car unless you're told to. These are safety signals. They say, I am not a threat. Step 2. When the officer approaches, be polite. Say, good evening, officer, or hello. Hand over your license, registration, and insurance when asked. That's required by law in most places. Do not argue about why you were pulled over. That conversation happens later, in court if necessary, not on the side of the road. Now here's where the strategy begins. The officer will almost certainly start asking questions. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Do you know how fast you were going? Have you had anything to drink tonight? Each of these is optional. You do not have to answer. But instead of saying, I don't answer questions out of nowhere, which can feel abrupt, you can simply pause, take a breath, and say, Officer, I'm happy to provide my documents, but I don't answer questions about where I've been or where I'm going. That's it. That's the line. Say it once. Say it calmly, then stop talking. Do not explain why. Do not say because I know my rights, or my lawyer told me, or I saw this on YouTube. Any explanation gives them something to push back on. Just the line. Then silence. And here's what happens next. Most officers will accept this. Some will push harder. Why won't you answer? What are you hiding? If they push, you simply repeat the exact same words. Officer, I'm happy to provide my documents, but I don't answer questions. Same tone, same calm, no anger, no fear. This is the hard part. Because your brain will scream at you to explain, to justify, to be helpful. That's the social conditioning. We've been taught since childhood that polite people answer questions, that refusing is rude, that only guilty people have something to hide. But that's not the law. That's psychology. And in this situation, psychology is not your friend. Let me tell you about one more case. This one is from Florida, 2016. A young woman named Brittany is pulled over for a broken license plate light. The officer asks if he can search her car. She says no. Politely, calmly, he asks again. She says no again. He brings a drug dog. The dog alerts on nothing. She is let go 15 minutes later. Here's what's incredible. The officer later admitted in his report that he asked to search because she seemed nervous. That's it. That's the whole reason. She seemed nervous, which she was, because she was being pulled over. That's circular logic. but it's also completely legal. Police can ask to search your car even if they have no evidence, and most people say yes, because they think saying no makes them look guilty. But Brittany didn't, and because of that, her car wasn't searched. Her privacy was protected, and she drove away with nothing more than a warning about her license plate light. This is the difference between understanding the game and being a pawn in it. Now, I want to be absolutely clear about something. None of this is advice to be confrontational. None of this is advice to be disrespectful. The single fastest way to turn a routine traffic stop into a nightmare is to be hostile, aggressive, or insulting. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting something much more subtle. I'm suggesting you recognize that a traffic stop is a specific type of interaction with specific rules. And if you don't know those rules, you will lose. Not because you're guilty, but because the system is designed to get information, and you're designed to give it. Let's zoom out for a second. Because this isn't really about traffic stops. This is about power dynamics. This is about how humans interact when one person has authority and the other person feels vulnerable. And once you see that pattern, you start noticing it everywhere. Job interviews, performance reviews, conversations with your landlord, arguments with your partner, anywhere someone asks you a question that feels simple but isn't. Think about it. When your boss asks, "Why were you late this morning?" they're not just asking for a reason. They're testing whether you take responsibility, whether you make excuses, whether you deflect blame. The question itself is a psychological tool, and most people walk right into it. The same thing happens in relationships. Why didn't you call me back? What were you doing last night? These aren't just information gathering questions. They're often tests of trust, tests of loyalty, tests of how you react under mild pressure. And once you understand that, you can stop answering the surface question and start addressing the real one. But back to the roadside, because this is where the stakes are highest. Here's a question I get all the time. If I refuse to answer questions, can they arrest me? The short answer is no. Refusing to answer questions is not a crime. The Fifth Amendment protects you from self-incrimination. That doesn't just apply in courtrooms. It applies on the sidewalk, on the highway, anywhere a government agent is asking you questions that could lead to criminal charges. The Supreme Court has upheld this again and again. You are not required to help law enforcement build a case against you, even if you've done nothing wrong. But here's the nuance. You do have to identify yourself in most states if you've been lawfully detained. That means your name and your address. Usually that's on your license anyway, so you've already provided that. Beyond that, silence is golden. Now some of you might be thinking, this sounds great in theory, but in practice I'd be too scared to say no. I get that. I really do. Being pulled over is scary. Your heart is pounding, your mouth is dry. The last thing you want to do is say something that might make the officer mad. That's why preparation matters. That's why I'm telling you this now, on a Tuesday afternoon when you're safe in your living room. Because if you decide today that you're going to handle a traffic stop a certain way, you're much more likely to actually do it when the moment comes. I want you to do something right now. I'm serious. Pause the video if you need to. Say the line out loud. "Officer, I'm happy to provide my documents, but I don't answer questions." Say it like you mean it. Say it calm. Say it slow. Say it until it feels natural. Because when the lights are flashing behind you, your brain is going to default to panic. And panic wants to babble. Panic wants to explain. Panic wants to say, "Oh, I'm coming from my friend's house. We just had dinner. I only had one beer. I swear I wasn't speeding." That's the worst possible response. That's confession fuel. That's giving them everything they want. Don't believe me? There's a reason police body camera footage is filled with people talking themselves into handcuffs. Innocent people. Nice people. People who have never been in trouble a day in their lives. They answer one question, then another, and suddenly they've contradicted themselves on something small, like what time they left work, and now the officer has what they call inconsistencies. And inconsistencies look like deception. And deception looks like probable cause. Let me bring this home. The real reason police ask these questions isn't because they need to know where you're going. It's because they need to know who you are. Not your name, not your address, but the deeper who. Are you nervous? Are you defensive? Are you hiding something? Do you respect authority? Will you comply? Every question is a test, and every answer is data. But here's what most people never realize. You are allowed to decline the test. Not rudely, not defiantly, but firmly, calmly, respectfully. And when you do, you take back control of the interaction, not through confrontation, through clarity, through knowing what you will and won't do before the lights ever come on. So here's my challenge to you. Share this video with someone you care about, your brother, your mom, your best friend, because most people will never hear this information anywhere else. They'll go their whole lives thinking that cooperation equals safety, and usually it does, but when it doesn't, the cost can be enormous. A ticket you didn't deserve, a search of your car, an arrest, a night in jail, a mark on your record that never should have been there. You don't have to live in fear of the police. You don't have to hate them. You just have to understand the game. And once you do, you can't unsee it. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you're driving and you see those lights in your rearview mirror, Take a breath, pull over safely, hands on the wheel, polite greeting, license and registration. And then, when the questions start, you have a choice. You can play their game by their rules, or you can remember this video, take another breath, and say something most officers rarely hear. Officer, I'm happy to provide my documents, but I don't answer questions. And then you'll see what happens, because very few people ever do. Let me know in the comments after watching this, do you think you'd actually say that line, or do you think you'd default to answering like most people? Be honest, I read the comments, and I promise you your answer might help someone else make the right choice when it counts. Thanks for watching, stay safe, stay smart. And remember, just because someone asks a question doesn't mean you have to answer it. This response is AI generated for reference only.